All right, up on stage next. Drop the mic. That was not a mic drop moment, but let's count it as one. Could I have Arturo and Tim to the principal's office? Arturo and Tim. Who's going to sit where? Okay, one of you plug this on the other. Pin the tail on the dog. No, let's not do that.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
And if you can, yeah. Okay. You take this one. You take this one.
Thank you.
Okay. All yours.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Should we start off with an intro of what Redbelly is?
Yeah, let's do that. So my name's Tim. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Redbelly Network. Redbelly Network's an Australian technology, actually. It was invented in the University of Sydney and CSIRO. And at its core, it's a consensus algorithm. So it's a patented, highly scalable and secure blockchain. And so it was invented, 2016 now. And so there are a lot of amazing technologies that get invented in this country that don't get commercialized very well. So where my previous role was the CEO of a venture studio in Sydney called Block 8. And so we built a bunch of early stage crypto projects. And what we did was we actually approached the CSIRO and University of Sydney. We did a joint venture together. So the idea was to take this technology out of academia and commercialize it for the world. And so we did that in 2021 and we've been building ever since. So as of October last year, we went to mainnet and it's been a massive roller coaster. We've got over $1 billion of assets on chain now. We've got over 700,000 KYC wallets and we've got over $70 billion of signed RWA contracts. So we're very much looking to be the top RWA compliant network in the world and we're born in Australia. So pleased to be here.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
How easy was that?
Very easy. I didn't have any grey hair before.
So there's been a lot of focus on RWAs. And I mean, what are they?
So it's funny, I call them real world assets, but they're really just traditional assets, right? We're used to buying them on the stock market, we're used to buying them through TradFi. A lot of retail users typically think of real world assets as real estate, right? But from our perspective, our actual core customer is the asset issuer. So the asset issuer is someone that runs a hedge fund or someone that originates an asset and sells it to either retail investors through a super fund or wholesale investors like investment banks. And so this is a well understood, regulated and licensed market in TradFi. And so what we really wanted to do was create a network that's compliant by default. And so what we've developed is this verifiable credentials ID layer. And what verifiable credentials is a way for you to cryptographically prove eligibility. So if you're a sophisticated investor, you can show that you've got that status. Like imagine what you put on your LinkedIn. Imagine having cryptographic proof of that. Why that matters on a blockchain is because every other network, in fact most of them, are anonymous. And so that's good in many ways. But when you're bringing these traditional assets onto a distributed global network, the asset issue, right? And so when they tokenize these assets, they have to make sure that the person is eligible to buy them. And so we built an ecosystem where it's much easier for those asset issuers to deploy large assets at scale and much easier for investors, both retail and wholesale, to interact with those assets. So for us, real world assets is anything of value that an investor might want to buy. It could be receivables, bonds, gold, silver, carbon credits, anything like this. And when we tokenize them in crypto, we call them real world assets because apparently Web3 isn't real world.
I don't think I've been this quiet ever on stage. It feels very strange. Okay, I will not be quiet for longer. But before I get into this, talk to me about consensus. Why is that important? What is it?
Yeah, so the actual core innovation of Redbelly is the consensus algorithm. So like I said, it was worked on for many years. It received a patent in the US last year. It took 6 years to get that. And what makes it novel is it's scalable as the network grows and it's deterministic. So it means that there's a 100% guarantee mathematically that a valid transaction will be committed to the next block. So there's no branches, there's no forks, it's deterministic. And so when you're dealing with real world asset classes at the size we are, you can't have rollbacks. And even if you did, think about the operational knock-ons to these regulated companies. So for us, the consensus is purpose-built for these types of use cases. And this has been one of the major issues with asset issuers putting these assets on Ethereum or other even cheaper networks that run the EVM. So for us, consensus is the technology at the core of Redbelly, and it's what essentially coordinates all of the transactions and the state of the network at any given time.
So in reality, the only reason why you want to have a blockchain is because you can trust the consensus. You can trust that there is finality in transfers of high value assets. So it's kind of an important thing, right?
A little bit.
I'm going to try to take you through a bit of a journey here to show one of the projects that we've been working on, which I think is it's not only a big project, but it's a special project because it's a different take on RWAs. The take that we're going to showcase here is one that we did for a company called Hutley. That is one of the biggest platforms for real estate contracts in Australia. Now, for the geeky ones that care about what RWAs are and the take that we have on these things is that many speak about tokenizing high-value assets like actual real estate, like public shares or specific types of securities. Now, some people would say that there are regulatory hurdles to those. I don't think that there are as many as many people think, because at the end of the day, they are traded by licensed entities. But one thing is for sure, and it's that there are certain requirements by law that make the settlement of these assets depend on specific technologies. Like, for example, public shares need to settle through chess. Or if you have a real estate asset, it needs to settle through PEXA. Therefore, tokenizing those assets means that you can't have finality in that settlement through an on-chain transaction. Therefore, why? Right? We went down a slightly different route, and it's effectively tokenizing commercial agreements with cash flow attached to them. Very simply, take an invoice, for example, or a rental contract. So in this scenario, we built some special tech. We had to focus a lot on confidentiality, so there was a lot of ZK building in this case. But I'm compressing all of that complexity into green lines to make it a little bit simpler. And what we did was enable the modeling, let's say, of a tenant paying monthly rent into a rental agreement that is represented by an NFT. Then that NFT is held by a property account. Then there is an agent, standard agent, like I don't know,
LJ Hooker.
LJ Hooker, right? And they will then perform a service that they get paid for that is represented by this agency contract. There's nothing new that I'm describing here. The only thing that is slightly different is that instead of having PDFs and paper, these are NFTs and the payments are done on chain. Right now, why is it cool? It's actually cool because the holder of this NFT is the beneficial owner of the balance of future payments of this of the fees. Therefore, if you have a lender and the lender wants to offer a loan to the agency contract, this is called a rent roll. Then by just transferring the agency NFT to the lender knows that any future cash flows go to them directly. Therefore, they're comfortable with giving an upfront loan of cash to the agent. Now, there's nothing different in principle to how these things work in the real world. I mean, there are many invoice factoring scenarios where when the invoice is getting paid, when the invoice is being factored, the invoice bank account needs to be specifically a bank account given to you by the lender, right? So that they get the payments straight to them. This simplifies that process. Now, to make it even more interesting, because here we just simplified direct lending, we've been working on, with a group of industry participants on what does the future of securitization look like. So I'm not going to take it, there's a lot of things happening here. I'm happy to talk about it later on, but what I want to showcase is literally how you can start using exactly the same principles, pooling assets into a bond contract, where this bond contract then is issued and sold to one investor, where that one investor picks up the entire bond that is collateralized by these agency contracts. And then the fees go straight from the source through the same system all the way to the actual investor, meaning that we're connecting capital to money. That version on ACID is basically this, and I definitely won't go through everything here, apart from just saying that instead of having one investor, this example here describes how you can actually have a public issuance through an exchange and actually have a secondary market. Now, what I want to have sink in is that the payment happening here is on exactly the same system as the payment happening there. And we've really never seen anything like that before, but we can now thanks to blockchain. Now, we always talk about the 10% benefit, the 10 times benefit that a user needs to have for a technology to be adopted, or rather a service to be adopted. Now, actually, sorry. Think of it this way. Everything that's happening here that is executed by a person can, and perhaps even should, be executed by an agentic layer, an AI agent. Like, you can't say, you can't have a panel without mentioning AI. That's what I'm doing now. But I'm not just mentioning it. What we had to implement here was actually a concept called agentic delegation. So in this model, what we're talking about is not having an agent work as an autonomous thing per se. It acts as a delegate to you. It's as an assistant. It's somebody that's doing something that you would be doing, that you have responsibility over. And in order to be able to achieve that, you need to have a framework where you can delegate identity, delegate keys to the agent, and not only delegate identity in keys, but also policies. So the flow is that you start off with a user, the user chooses the agent, delegates keys, delegates policies. The agent does something, an intention, an intent as it's called. It gets verified by a policy engine that checks if the agent is actually allowed to do this thing. It gets put into a queue, and then it gets executed. So there's a separation between execution and agent intent, very much like any compliance process with people. And the really interesting part here is that this applies to almost any high-value agent transaction, not only a monetary one. You need to have that separation, which is underpinned actually by blockchain smart contracts, because you want to ensure that the policy engines and the executions are not tampered with. So take all of that. I'll leave it to you.
Oh, this is where I come in. So this is the Hutley use case that Arturo was speaking about. So Hutley is interesting, like you've already said. They have about 40% of digital rental agreements in Australia, of all of the ones that you can possibly sign. And so what that means is about $18 billion a year of rental payments pass through these agreements. And so to use zero-knowledge proofs and payments and securitisation, tokenization on a compliant blockchain like us is pretty different and new. And what this represents is this is the first tranche of assets that have been tokenized. So there's two things. There's the tokenization of the sales agreement, which sits between the renter and the landlord, and that's what this is here. So it's about 210 million US so far. And then there's the tokenized rental agreements, which Arturo mentioned as well, which is a whole nother number. And so this is basically a dashboard called RWA.io, which reflects from the user's or the customer's perspective which assets they've deployed on our network, and it gives us sort of an aggregate value. So as we're deploying, we've only been live for about 4 months now, but our asset issuers, who are traditional TradFi and financial services companies, are moving towards us, so moving on chain. And so what's exciting is these numbers are growing. So like I said, we're at about 1 billion, give or take, at the moment on chain. We've got a lot more RWAs than some of the most sort of successful projects that you would all know already. And the difference is we're super focused on RWAs. We're not just counting, wrapped Bitcoin or something, right? You can do that if you like, but we're super focused on that. So this is something you're going to continue to see grow over time, and Hutley's a fantastic use case for that.
So that all of the things that we were speaking about before, it's kind of compressed into that little number. So when people ask, when is that number going up? There's a lot of work that happens, for that shit to happen. Final slide.
Oh, I've stolen some of my thunder. I'll talk about some more of the tech stuff. So Redbelly, when we did the joint venture, was just Bitcoin. So it was just running UTXO. It achieved 660,000 transactions per second. Bitcoin does 10, if you're lucky. So it's extremely fast. It's 6-7 times faster than MasterCard as just a payments consensus. So what we've done since the joint venture is build the EVM. So EVM compatible, anything that runs on Ethereum runs on us. And so Ethereum also does about 10 transactions per second. We're doing 23,500 transactions per second. The blockchain is so fast that we found race conditions in ether.js, which is like the open source library for the entire crypto space to use. So we've found problems with MetaMask and a bunch of things. It's almost like broadband tooling can't keep up with the network. So we're very proud of how fast it is without losing consistency or finality, because a lot of fast blockchains will trade that off and not tell you about it until the network rolls back your transaction and you've just paid for something you didn't get. So that's huge, where we've had over 250 KYC and KYB nodes join the network, so it's incredibly impressive and global. What else have I got here? A bunch of assets. The other thing, I guess what's important for us is all this RWA stuff is fun, but where we actually want to end up is what we call structured products, and anyone in TradFi will know what this is. When you have a network of compliant assets, you can compose them into new products. So I'll make a simple example is take tokenized Bitcoin, wrap Bitcoin, compose that with a government receivable and a private equity. And then an asset issuer now has a product that TradFi can't build, and it certainly can't build that quickly and at that price and at that distribution scale. So investors are excited about this. They could use the OKX wallet and buy it in their wallet, right? Because it's a Web3 instrument. And so we're super excited about that. I think I've done enough shilling, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.